So Bitcoin is sitting in what looks to be a major fear zone right now. The price has pulled back, sentiment is shaky, and a lot of people are starting to doubt the next move. But when you slow things down and actually line the data up, the price, the structure, and the on-chain analysis, Bitcoin is doing something very similar. It's not necessarily breaking down, it's actually compressing, absorbing fear, and setting up the next macro phase. So before we go into the charts, let's talk macro, because this is where the disconnect is showing up. When analyzing Bitcoin's price versus global liquidity, Bitcoin has never been this detached from global liquidity. It looks mispriced and undervalued. So when analyzing the chart, Bitcoin's price is here in gold and the global liquidity or money supply is in white. Historically, they tend to follow each other hand in hand or very closely, but we had a massive divergence where Bitcoin started to roll over and the global money supply increased vertically. So this is a divergence, but it's important to remember these divergences don't last forever. Price tends to catch up, not collapse. Now heading over to our next piece of macro news where Bitcoin adoption is moving into the real world. Eric Trump has announced that Trump Organization will start accepting Bitcoin at all of their properties. This isn't theory anymore. This is Bitcoin moving into real world payment rails, and right as sentiment is cooling. This is usually how bottoms form, not tops, when we're talking about this kind of information. Now let's look at some on-chain signals, because Bitcoin's short-term holder momentum has reached a similar level to the last two major bottoms. Is the turning point near? So historically, when short-term holders panic out like this, it often marks trend exhaustion to the downside, not the start of a new bear market. Keep this macro and on-chain context in mind as we go through the charts. So let's start on the weekly chart where Bitcoin has been consolidating for the last few weeks. We have a range where we have a level of resistance above at 94 to 95k and a level of support between 84 to 83k waiting below. There's no impulsive breakdown. There's no structural collapse through any major levels. This is just sideways movement after a prior advance. So at this moment in time, this is what consolidation looks like inside bullish conditions, not necessarily a distribution. And there's a previous trend line that Bitcoin was under as resistance that it's now turned into support. So if we drag this right underneath our consolidation structure, you'll notice that it was resistance back in sort of April 2024. We broke through this resistance in November, and this is the second occasion after a macro correction that we've actually come back down to this trend line. And once again, just like Bitcoin did in the prior correction, we had consolidation for a few weeks before continuation to a new all-time high. It looks like we're doing the exact same thing again. We have this range of consolidation between 94k resistance and 84k support, and we're holding the prior trend line on a second point of contact, which once again points to consolidation and not necessarily distribution. Which now leads us onto our 3-day chart where we're sitting inside the so-called fear box. And here's the key detail. Price is currently respecting it. Every time Bitcoin has dipped into this zone previously, buyers have stepped in and stabilized the price. So fear zones only matter when they fail, and so far this one hasn't. We are holding onto a critical level of support down below at 84k, which ties up with the weekly consolidation period and the prior trend line of support. So fear never feels like opportunity. And once again, zooming into this structure, it looks very similar, to the prior bottom that we formed back in April of 2025, where we had a double bottom structure, i.e. this level of resistance, a double bottom, and then went for a break. And once again, Bitcoin could be on the cusp of doing something similar. We've got this resistance, come back, form a double bottom, go for the break. Do you see the similarities in structure here? It's quite hard to ignore. So now looking at the daily chart, we're going to zoom in a little bit more here. And despite the pullback that we've seen over the last week or two, we're still forming higher low formation. And we're actually bouncing off of the same demand zone that Bitcoin's been holding since late November. In fact, you can evidently see here we are in another range between a level of resistance at 95k and a level of support down in the 84k territory. So zooming in, we're basically looking at the larger time frames, but in a zoomed in perspective, right? Looking at the daily, it clearly breaks down the structure here, where Bitcoin is adhering to a key level of support and resistance and is currently caught inside this range. And over the last couple of days, this is where Bitcoin has seen significant bounces in the past and is once again witnessing those strong candles. So within this sort of environment, it's been controlled downside movement. This isn't what bearish continuation looks like. This is corrective behavior inside an uptrend. So looking at the 4-hour time frame, price is compressing, support is holding, volatility is contracting, and structure is tightening into an apex. This kind of compression usually doesn't resolve sideways forever. It typically ends in expansion. So right now, there is a massive compression inside this triangle formation. We did have a deviation below, but saw an immediate sort of recovery from the bulls inside this demand area, which is the sort of third major point of contact in this 4-hour support zone that's been holding since late November in our 84K support territory. So right now, price is ultimately compressed and looking for expansion. And giving the higher time frame context, a bullish breakout becomes a very real possibility when you consider that, which drops us into this 2-hour time frame chart for Bitcoin. Zooming in further, where price is clearly moving up from a defined order block. This tells us that institutional interest is still present, and as long as this order block holds, which currently sits at $87,000, the path of least resistance remains to the upside. So when you add everything together, macro, we have the massive global liquidity disconnect between Bitcoin and the global money supply. Bitcoin has never been this detached. It looks mispriced and undervalued. We have the Trump family announcing the Trump organization will start accepting Bitcoin at all of their properties. And we also have short-term momentum reaching similar levels to the last two major bottoms. We should not ignore this macro analysis. And when it comes to price action, Bitcoin is holding on the higher time frames a level of consolidation between 95K resistance and 84K support, sitting on a previous level of resistance and now confirming that trend line as support for a second time this year. The 3-day time frame, fear is actually being respected. Try not to panic. This has historically marked a local bottom for Bitcoin in the past. And when it comes to the daily, you can evidently see we are caught in a tight trading range between that supply at 95K and support at 94K. This is typical price movement of sideways consolidation, not a distribution phase. And zooming into the lower time frames here on the 2-hour time frame, we have the order block, which is holding us at $87,000. And as long as we remain above this price, then we are looking good for the continuation back up to our supply, which roughly sits at that 95K territory we've been discussing throughout the video. Overall, this doesn't look like weakness for Bitcoin. It looks like fear being absorbed by stronger hands. Now, let's check on Ethereum, because ETH is often the confirmation, and we're seeing clear bullish divergences form here. We have higher low formation on the charts for Ethereum on the daily, building this higher low structure, whilst in the RSI, we actually have these lower lows forming. So whilst the RSI is forming lower lows and prices forming higher lows, we're actually creating a massive bullish divergence, showing sellers are losing momentum. Now, looking at ETH on the 2-hour time frame, the structure looks to be in what's forming a bullish pennant, where we come up from a macro demand territory where ETH bounced at roughly 2,700. It came up into this triangle sideways compression and is now looking for the continuation of the trend. This is a bullish pattern, and it points towards running back into supply for ETH on the lower time frames, which sits at 3.1K. This is a classic continuation structure. ETH is building strength whilst Bitcoin consolidates, and this is often a healthy sign for the broader market. So don't confuse fear with failure, because markets don't bottom when everything feels good. Markets typically bottom when we feel fear, when the fear is high, when it's setting into people's mind, when structure actually holds and fundamentals are quietly improving. And this is the case right now for Bitcoin. So as long as key levels continue to be respected, this environment favors patience and discipline, not panic. Respect the structure, ignore the noise, and let price confirm its next move. Now, if you want to support the channel, the links below are there for you. You can trade on our platform we use every day, get fee discounts and bonuses. It is completely optional, but it really helps the channel grow. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next update.